I spoke to Jihad al-Haddad, who is the Muslim Brotherhood spokesman, who is now in hiding. And I began by putting it to him that he had called Muslim Brotherhood supporters out onto the streets today. And so he was responsible for putting their lives at risk.
We didn't bring anyone into the city at all now. Yesterday's events and Wednesday's massacres and butchering of more than 4,000 protesters on the streets and trying to instigate a media blackout have infuriated the rest of the Egyptian people. They realize for the first time the danger that short-term and long-term that a military coup brings to this country, and the promise of democracy that turned into a full-fledged police state, even much more brutal than that of Mubarak. Even the Minister of Interior Affairs slipped his tongue on air saying we will restore state security before January 25th. This is a regime killing its people, trying to teach them a lesson that force and military might wins people's will, and we believe otherwise.
Images are being broadcast, supposedly, of Muslim Brotherhood supporters carrying weapons.
This is untrue. Muslim Brotherhood supporters or Muslim Brotherhood members do not walk around with tattoos or specific gear or clothing. We have evidence to believe that these are police officers dressed in plain clothes. Videos are circulating on social media and on YouTube of police officers being gathered in front of stations and dressed over their uniform and sometimes replacing their uniform in plain clothes to attribute such violence to peaceful protesters or civilians on the streets.
Then who killed the police?
Way of the military. This is the way of the military regime. The only image that the police has put out of anything that happened to them is a police officer being carried by another two police officers with his finger bleeding. This is the only thing that's happened. We believe that all of that is instigated. We don't know who killed police. We never go into the violence cycle, and we always remain non-violent. It's supposedly the act of the police itself that was supposed to protect the mosques, protect the churches, protect the protesters, and they're the ones instigating the violence and killing them themselves.
Are you prepared to enter talks now?
We were always prepared when we started. We are prepared now, and we will continue always prepared. We never closed the door to dialogue, but on grounds of constitutional legitimacy and democratic representation of the people, with no presence and no seat allowed for the military. The military belongs in the barracks. We will never allow them a new role in politics again in Egypt. They have plunged Egypt into a 60-year cycle of military dictatorships, and twice they've done military coups in Egypt and sidelined all electoral milestones. There is no guarantee they will never do it again. This is the mentality of the military, and it has to be changed.
Are you prepared to sit down with this interim government now and negotiate as long as the army are not there?
We are prepared to sit down with political leaders and heads of parties, all politicians and societal leaders in Egypt. Certainly not with a military-appointed, backed interim government. They are illegitimate. They only represent the interim, the military coup. There's only one character in Egypt that represents all Egyptians and that has electoral legitimacy to speak on their behalf, and that is President Morsi, kidnapped and arrested by the army.
How are you going to end this?
There is only one way for this to end. The military has to go back into the barracks. They should not have a political role in this country, and democracy has to be returned to this country. The people's will have to be respected. There is only one guy who holds the key to solving this, and that is President Morsi. No other solution can happen here.
Jihad al-Haddad from the Muslim Brotherhood. And in the last few minutes, they have also announced that they want a week of protests across the country. They want their people back out on the streets. Well, our Foreign Affairs correspondent, Jonathan Rugman, is with me now. What is the latest in this city?
Well, armoured personnel carriers have sealed off major intersections. Tahrir Square behind us is sealed off with barbed wire. The curfew has been brought forward, and there are vigilantes armed with knives and with guns protecting local neighbourhoods against any attacks by Muslim Brotherhood supporters. Every attempt at mediating this crisis from the EU and from the United States in particular has failed. I wonder if there isn't a role for the ousted President Morsi here. The last thing he said before he was taken under house arrest was that he did not want his supporters to embrace violence. Somebody needs to talk to President Morsi and persuade him to tell his supporters to do that. But even if he did issue that message, even if the army let him issue that message, you wonder now whether Muslim Brotherhood supporters are now so enraged by this violence, they've been so demonized that they have become the devil that the army feared.
Now, last night you showed us this mosque where there were up to 200 bodies that hadn't been part of the official count. You went back there today. What did you find?
I went back to that mosque where we'd seen hundreds of bodies yesterday from the violence on Wednesday. It was locked shut. The ice that was used to cool the bodies was melting in the courtyard. We were told it was a crime scene. We were told that the police had attacked the mosque. They had tear gassed it last night and they had removed all the bodies. We don't know where. And relatives of the dead were still turning up, peering through the bars, trying to find out where their relatives were. I suppose the authorities could say that they were trying to clean up a messy and unhygienic situation, but it looked as if they were trying to erase from memory what happened on Wednesday.
Jonathan, thank you. Well, it's also worth mentioning that the Foreign Office is advising British tourists who are still planning to visit Egypt in the coming days to check for updates on the FCO website. German citizens have been told not to come to Egypt to visit any part of the country, though the British authorities are not currently advising against travel to the Red Sea resorts, which they say are unaffected by the current unrest. We'll have more from here later on in the programme, but for now, back to you, Kathy.